Cool. All right. Welcome one and all. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is you are in the world, to another Talking Football event with Football Business Network and in partnership with Football Coaches Australia. Our guest tonight is the chairman of Football New South Wales, the largest federation in Australia, Mr. Antar Isaac. Antar, thank you, sir, for joining us for what I'm sure will be a really good conversation. You know, the conversations we've had today with people that we've had on, and we're fortunate to have Simon Hill, who was on the call last week. And we've always had Gavin as well, who was the first guest at our event. They've been around football on the field, so tonight will be a little bit different, I think. We'll probably have some conversations about the business side of the game, but something tells me that it'll go back on to the on-field conversations that we're going to be having. So just for those that haven't joined the event before, the way this works is that I'll ask a couple of questions to Antar. Hopefully he'll respond in ways which will allow you guys to fire questions away to us. Just ask the questions through the chat so that I know exactly who's coming and who's asking the questions. And then when the questions come up, what I will do is pass the forum over to you. So the quicker you get questions through, the less you have to hear my voice. So Antar, thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks, James. Good evening, one and all. And you've done me no favours by making me follow on from, Terry, Rob, Simon, the last few weeks. So yeah, no thanks.
Well, you know, we try and change it up. And don't worry, the audience this evening are a very distinguished audience. I'm sure they'll go easy on you. I'm sure they will. But as I say, you know, this is an opportunity just to really have a chat, a general chit chat about football and about business and things like that as well. So I know the majority of the people on this call will know you, and I know they've probably known you for some time. So typically what I do is I do ask people to introduce themselves, but you know, for the purpose of the recording of the event, for people that are going to listen to this, can you just give us a quick overview as to your position in Football New South Wales, what you do, and what you do in your other day jobs?
Yeah, sure. Well, the chairman of Football New South Wales. I've held that role, which I assumed in 2016. I've been involved in football for now 25 years. Started way back in 1995 at what was then the Australian Soccer Federation when I was at university doing some work experience there. Actually commenced employment at then Soccer Australia in 1996 and worked at the national governing body until 2007. Mainly my roles, or primarily they were in finance. My background is a commerce degree, majoring in accounting and corporate law. And in 2007, I ended up leaving the FFA to establish my own consulting business. And since that time, I've been consulting to FIFA, the AFC, OFC, FIBA, the ICC, and many member federations around the world. Got back in on the board of Football New South Wales in 2013 as a director, and have been there ever since, James.
So a man of many talents. You know, and you can see that, you know, from the work that you're doing across the piece. And you know, football itself in this country, I arrived in this country in 2010, and even, you know, in the last 10 years, football has changed dramatically as well. But just talking about football, and one of the things that we were speaking about earlier was that today Football New South Wales launched a report on the game for 2019. And we were talking earlier about some of the things that I don't think people realise that Football New South Wales actually do. So can you just explain the context behind the report that came out and maybe some salient points that you feel the audience would be interested in hearing.
Yeah, so you're referring to the 2019 Value Proposition Report?
I am.
Yeah, so it's been obviously a question that we've received from stakeholders for a long time. I think a lot of the stakeholders or the governing bodies in football in Australia do receive this kind of request about what exactly it is that they do, what kind of value proposition do they offer to the participants, to the stakeholders, and so forth. And as an organisation, we were never set up really, and I don't think many football organisations have evolved from a very kind of a volunteer-based business model, you know, as recently as probably the 80s and 90s, into what we are now. Haven't evolved the capability to capture, define, and then express precisely what they do and what that value represents to the stakeholders. The other thing is, who are the stakeholders for Football New South Wales? Is it the source of, for example, where we get our capitation fees, which is the individual player, referee, and coach? Is it the clubs? Is it the associations that make up our membership, etc.? So what we embarked on doing, we dared ourselves really about 4 years ago as a board to capture, define, and then express publicly our value proposition. We did so without any hesitation in attracting criticism. I think that's fair. I think we're mature enough to you know, accept and have awkward conversations with stakeholders. But what we wanted to do was share with our stakeholders precisely what it is that we do, and to each of those stakeholders as well. You know, the individual player, their parents, if they're, you know, juniors, coaches, referees, clubs, associations, and so forth. But probably more importantly, James, was now we've established a benchmark. We've expressed the benchmark that we will be held accountable to, right? And I don't think there are many football organisations, in fact, there aren't any that we know of, that have done this in the way we've done it. And, you know, we've dared ourselves, and we're open to being held accountable. And we expect that our stakeholders in ensuing years will be able to say, this is what you did in 2019. We expect more from you in 2020. That's probably not a great example, by the way. Yeah, it's just, you know, the circumstances have not done us any favours, obviously, with COVID-19, but that was the intention.
So obviously, you know, there's a lot of different things in that report, notably the revenue and the profit that's there. And, you know, we're talking $16.7 million, I think it was, of investment, and a $16.9 million of revenue, so a 200k profit. And you're saying that there's about 3,000 events that happen in football each day. Is that's accurate? Yeah. Yeah.
So football mandated activities in New South Wales under the Football New South Wales and through our associations and 800 odd clubs, there are approximately 1.4 million activities a year. It equates to probably about 3,500. I actually haven't done the calculation, but roughly about that a day. It's an enormous amount, you know, and that covers a 365 day year.
Yeah.
And I think we were mentioning that the really incredible thing is we have just on 10,000 registered volunteers, and these 10,000 volunteers are expected to deliver 3,500 events a day, every day, 365 days a year. And, you know, that's one of our the areas of our focus moving into the future is what we can do, you know, to get the trend line in growth in volunteers going up, because it is the one area of our game that currently isn't growing, right? in terms of the people, coming on board. And there are a host of reasons for that. There are so many more expectations of volunteers now, legally, liability and safeguarding, and it's not an easy environment. So that's something we need to do and we're focused on as well.
Okay. And obviously, the COVID-19 situation has rendered a lot of different organisations to do certain things, put their staff in furlough and what have you. How do you feel Football New South Wales is coping with the current situation? And what's going to be the next steps for Football New South Wales to try and get grassroots and NPL back to, on the field, back to where the majority of people need to be? Yeah.
So the first question about how we're doing, to be honest, only time will tell, James. This is one of those situations that we don't control the tempo of. Everything with regard to COVID-19 is an urgency, a priority for our board and management. We're meeting now on a weekly basis as a board. Our management team are all daily speaking with stakeholders. We've had to make significant decisions in terms of standing down staff ourselves. As an organisation, we've benefited from the incredible work of the people who, had custody of the organisation before this current board and management. They were able to, with the stakeholders, build, assets and reserves and so forth, and we've carried on from that. So we're probably in a situation where we can manage it the way it is at the moment. But that as well is premised on the base that football restarts in the coming weeks and months, and on that I know our CEO Stuart and his senior management team are doing an incredible job working with government to understand what it is they expect from us, being proactive in developing guidelines for returning to training, providing the support necessary for our clubs and associations in terms of what they need to do in preparation for football recommencing. What we're waiting on at the moment, whilst we last week published a return to training guidelines and worked through that process with our associations and clubs, we're waiting for some kind of permission from the authorities, from the medical officials as well, to commence or give us some kind of indication of when we can commence actually playing. So we're still waiting on that. We hope, as an organisation, we've applied for an exemption to restart competitions, but we're still waiting on some kind of indication from authorities on when we'll get that permission.
So a lot of clubs have taken on the return to football phase one, and there's a significant number who are following the steps that are in place. And the steps that are in place are quite in depth. The hands and everything else that you've got to watch, the 5 minutes before you come to training and what have you. And obviously from a financial standpoint, and this is a sort of business side of the game, from a financial standpoint, there will be a significant amount of expenditure from these local clubs, whether it's grassroots or whether it be NPL. Is there a funding mechanism from Football New South Wales to help these clubs through what could be some quite onerous times? Or is it a case of the club's own responsibility to do that? And the second part of that question is, if it is the latter, do you foresee problems with the grassroots and NPL clubs who may not be able to sustain that for some time?
So I'll answer it this way. The priority of the Football New South Wales board when we were confronted with this situation was to ensure the viability, the long-term viability and sustainability of every football institution in New South Wales. Okay, that is our number one focus, priority, and you know, we won't accept any casualties from this. As a result of that, we've been working with the government, with the state government, to give them an understanding of what it actually costs to deliver football in New South Wales, whether it's through Football New South Wales, whether it's through our associations, whether it's through our clubs. We've worked with our associations and clubs to deliver that kind of information to the state government. They have that. We're hoping that, like every other state government, we will get some kind of commitment from them for some kind of financial support and stimulus. Okay, South Australia or the South Australian government has done that. The Victorian government, the Western Australian government, as an example, in South Australia, the SASF or SAFA, I guess it is now, have committed to assisting their clubs as a result of this. We can't make that commitment yet, but what we've done in the meantime as a board, only yesterday at our board meeting, we resolved to discount our capitation fees for every club and association by 20%. So that's something in the immediate or short term that we can offer. And hopefully, you know, we can get some kind of support and stimulus package, financial grant from the state government to help us even further and to pass that on to our associations and clubs.
Brilliant. Just on, I know we're talking about finances. Alan Stajic has got a statement or a question. Alan, on you go, mate.
Hi, Anta. Just a question on leadership. Like over the last 2 or 3 months, I think Peter V'landys is, you know, according to most people, probably stepped ahead of the pack in terms of leadership for sport across the country. And a lot of people are lauding his leadership and the way rugby league's come back. You know, they signed a new TV deal, you know, a lot of good ratings yesterday. Has our method in the last 2 or 3 months of governance and leadership been, you know, to deal with things behind closed doors and try and achieve the same goals? Do you think that's been successful? And do you think it's maybe been a missed opportunity by football?
Staj, you know, that's an interesting question. You know, obviously I take an interest as well in what the other sports are doing. Peter V'landys is a very special character, I think, right? He's what I'd consider a very old school leader. You know, he's the type of person that has exhibited an ability to have a vision, to dare and make a commitment to that vision and hold every single person accountable to that, right? I don't think there's many people that can do that. I think that's, you know, that's embedded in his DNA and who he is. The other thing is, you know, as a sport, the NRL, I think, are in a position where they won't be dictated to, right? In terms of you know, maybe their content, in terms of its value and so forth. I'm not sure we're there yet. It's a different approach. You know, early on, people were commenting that it wasn't really a dignified approach. You know, when the general population and government was dealing with, you know, trying to mitigate health concerns and potential dangers to people, the NRL came out and were asking the government for funding and so forth. So, you know, at different times and with the benefit of hindsight and the fact that they've been able to recommence rugby league, I think, yeah, he's going to look like a bit of a genius. But, you know, our approach has been a little more dignified, and I think it's you know, it's reflective of the lack of confidence we have as a sport. If I'm being honest with you, I think we've suffered from lack of confidence as a sport for decades. and maybe we get into that a little bit more a little later. But yeah, I think that's the difference in the approaches.
So obviously, the other type of football, the one with the odd-shaped balls, that started yesterday, and they're talking about now bringing back fans at some point down the line as well. And I think that, to be honest with you, I think it's too much too soon. But that's just my own personal opinion on that, which obviously shouldn't be taken for anything. But with regards to football in this country, and obviously we've got a new Football Federation Australia CEO. I know you've obviously spoken to James quite a number of times, and at one point you were touted for that role as well. What type of conversations have you had with James around the growth of the game in this country and the direction that he's looking to take it?
Yeah, I mean, what I can share is, the board nailed that decision on the CEO. James, I've known James for a long time. He's focused on building relationships, obviously. But I think in the few conversations I've had with him, he wants to frame the game for a long-term future, right? And from what I've been able to understand is it starts with understanding what our purpose is as an institution, beyond just being a game. And then, what each of the constituent parts in this institution is responsible for in terms of it delivering. I think that's the right approach. I think historically we've tended to initiate conversations around different models for the game, and trying to come up with the one model that will solve all of our problems and be the silver bullet for the game moving forward. I think that kind of discussion, without first understanding what our focus is irresponsible, because what we'll end up doing is what we've done probably the last 3 or 4 times that we've gone through the process of, reconsidering the model. We did it in 1996, we did it in 2003, we did it again recently in 2017. And what I've found personally is, if you don't understand the focus for the game, then we risk, building a boat, if I can use this example, for our voyage to get to the moon, right? So we really have to, as a game, come together and discuss the philosophical elements of what we want to achieve and the direction we want to go into. So, I've been encouraged by the conversations I've had with James.
Obviously, football is more than just on the field, and we're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to partner with Football Coaches Australia, and I've got members of the executive committee on here this evening. Gary Cole, I know you're keen to ask Anta about coaches, so on you go, mate.
Thanks, James. G'day, Anta.
Hey, James.
Firstly, a bit of an overarching statement. I think we've had a national curriculum here for a bit over 10 years now, and through that time, FFA and the member feds have put through thousands and thousands of coaches. We can probably say we've done a great job at licensing coaches along the country. My personal opinion, this is not something this is not official FCA statement. My personal opinion is that I don't think we've done a great job at ongoing coach education, which is, in my opinion, a mistake, given the fact that if we want our players to get better, our coaches need to get better. I'm just wondering where your thoughts are. You've obviously, Football New South Wales, got more players by a long way than anyone else, more coaches by a long way than anyone else. Just if you agree with that overarching statement, and if not, why not? And where Football New South Wales is at in terms of ongoing coach education for both men and women.
Gaz, brilliant statement. We, as a sport, we do coach accreditation brilliantly. we do coach development poorly. You know, and it's because I think, I mean, and I don't have the technical qualifications that you know many of you have on the call or in the virtual room, but you know, we use the benchmark of the number of coaches we have as an indicator of success, right? We create infographics every year that say, you know, last year we had 1,000 coaches and this year we have 1,100, right? But are we actually developing coaches who have the ability to impart knowledge, practical knowledge to our players, not only in the technical sense, but with the intangibles as well, right? And, you know, I get down on the game a lot because, you know, we did something 20 years ago that hasn't sat comfortably with me for a long time. We dispensed with generations of knowledge in the game, right? We have incredible coaches, legacy coaches, who were disenfranchised from the game 20 years ago. You know, people who could have easily shared incredible wisdom for the next generation of coaches coming through. The Raul Blancos, the Les Scheinflugs, Rally Rassiges, right? So many former NSL coaches as well. And, you know, thankfully in the A-League, we're seeing more Australian coaches. For me, I think that's a great thing, especially if we're trying to get more young players playing at that level. But in terms of the curriculum, as you mentioned, guys, it's changed a number of times, you know, the syllabus in the last at least 8 years that I've been at Football New South Wales. In March 2015, right, we had a decision to make at Football New South Wales to implement a new syllabus, which the recommendation of which was to go to a flatline system for youth. Okay. Another recommendation was that every NPL club needed to have a TD. Every NPL club had to have at least 3 contact sessions a week. Every NPL club needed coaches with licenses, of course, etc. Right? While we were reluctant to do a lot of that, especially in terms of dismantling what was previously, you know, the typical pyramid development system that, you know, gradually as it gets higher, you know, puts a little bit more pressure on kids, etc. We were being lobbied to go to a system which, you know, wanted to dispense with, you know, keeping score between, you know, at games, especially at junior level and so forth. It was signed by the FFA TD, the FFA national team coaches, and a whole host of people, okay? 2 consequences when we implemented that. And I don't think at the time people understood the cause and effect of that, right? 2 consequences. One was the incredible cost that it placed on NPL clubs and clubs who wanted to be accredited under the FFA system. You know, going from 2 contact sessions a week to 3 in any week, that's a 50% increase in costs right there for those clubs, okay? Lighting, facilities, hire, and so forth. Then they had to employ TDs, coaches, etc. So there's a cost. When you underpin that with the decision to, again, dismantle the whole compensation and transfer system, then it becomes less motivating and encouraging for clubs to actually invest in development. Because these clubs, grassroots through to NPL, are relied on to develop young players, and then they go for a $3,000 maximum fee to an A-League club, right? And we've seen that happen a couple of times. So it discourages those clubs as well. So that was one of the, I guess, unintended consequences. The other one I think, and I know there's a couple of my board members on here as well. Carlos Gonzalez, I think, is on. You know, I'm not sure that the people who have done these things have understood that, you know, whilst we live in a digital world, right? When we make decisions, especially for us in sports governance and admin, whilst we make decisions in a digital world, everything happens in analog, especially the further you go from the front office towards the pitch side, right? You change a syllabus for technical curriculum, for example. There's a latency in terms of when you can derive a benefit or you start seeing the benefits of that. The fact that we've changed our syllabus over the last 15 years, a number of times at least, as different technical directors have come in, I think has had an impact on the quality or our ability to produce talent, you know, that goes overseas and for the A-League and so forth. So, you know, it's I've probably said a lot for an observer without the technical quals that many of you have, but that's just my perception, Gary. You know, we need to develop our own DNA. You know, I agree with a lot of the narrative from the starting 11 and golden generation and so forth. Many of whom I can tell you signed the very document that I referred to earlier, right? And when we've spoken to a few of them since, you know, they said, well, we were employed by the governing body at the time, and that's all we could do, right? So, you know, I think I'm hoping that a part of this bigger conversation that we're about to embark on in the game, that's something we do. And I really hope that we start showing a bit more respect to the game's history, right? Because we have not done that. And I think that's a shame. That's a shameful thing for the game, right? And I think that's why we lack so much confidence.
And firstly, thanks for that. That's very honest of you. How do we make coach education? How do we put a greater value on it? So that the game itself understands that if we want to produce players of a better quality, that've got more chance of going overseas and hopefully bring in millions of dollars in transfer fees. How do we raise the importance of coaches and coach education?
Yeah. Gary, you know, I'm not sure where we're at with the whole mentoring aspect of it. I mean, it's great to have a syllabus, right? It's great to have textbooks, etc. You know, unless people are getting the experience, the practical experience, and they're given the permission, right, to think critically about what they're doing, given permission and a mandate to adapt things to suit their own style, right? That's one thing when I've spoken to you know, our own people in New South Wales. I think in a lot of cases, you know, there's this belief that possibly our syllabus is a bit too prescriptive and doesn't allow that kind of critical thinking an individual can do at a micro level. Especially, you know, when they're coaching their own teams. The other thing that I mentioned was the mentoring. You know, again, we've got incredible coaches. They're outliers at the moment, disenfranchised, right? You know, that's exactly the type of people we need to be assisting our coaches. You know, and I think, just my perspective, the higher a coach goes up on in terms of, you know, the pathway from, you know, the very fundamental principles of coaching to the professional level, you know, there's that intangible element that they need. You know, the man management or woman management, you know, the ability to motivate and so forth. And I'm not aware of you know, too many programs that we do at Football New South Wales with regard to that. I know the guys did a terrific job last year with the coaching conference. But I think we need to do more mentoring, guys.
I agree, mate. Thanks, Anta.
We had a chat last week with the Voice of Football, and Simon has, there was a number of different comments about the federations and the way the football is run, and Simon answered it very eloquently. But he's got a beauty of a question for your good self as well, Anta. So Simon, on you go, mate.
Thanks, James. Hey, Anta, how are you going, mate?
Good, Simon. How are you?
Good. Look, just a question. I did put this out on Twitter last week. I saw that Football Queensland had put something out about a consultation process that they would start in, you know, across the whole of the state to decipher what football was going to look like from 2020 onwards.
Yeah.
I'm not being critical of that at all. I think that's a great thing. I also know that Football Victoria did something very similar in late 2018. My concern, I don't know if, I mean, you talked about putting out, you know, value statements. My concern, particularly in the current climate, and we all know the challenges that the game faces at all levels at the moment, are we going to get to the point where we have, again, 9 different plans for 9 different parts of the country, and nobody is going to be able to agree on one unified approach to take this game out of the doldrums and finally unleash its potential? I think it's something that is hugely frustrating at the moment for all of us in the football community, that we still seem to be operating, as Rob Sherman said on this call a couple of weeks ago, in silos. We all operate in tiny little groups, our own states, our own clubs. Everybody's looking at their own part of the picture, but nobody seems to be able to come up with an overall cohesive, long-term national plan that we all have buy-in to and that we can finally get this game moving forward. Is there any prospect of that occurring, or are we going to continue along this road?
Yeah, that's a great question, Simon. No, I think that there's definitely hope, right? I think that conversation is happening. You know, it's interesting, Simon. We, over many generations, as member federations and the various institutions, football institutions, they've evolved to become independent and quite strong organizations themselves, right? There's a lot of rhetoric about their place in the game moving forward. You know, I'm not sure that we've used the member federations properly, to be honest. I'm certain the FFA hasn't done it in the last 20 years. Instead of, like you say, coordinating the group so that our focus, our delivery is aligned on what we do, we've had to default to doing things because there's been a lack of guidance from the FFA. Okay, if you have a look at the evolution of most national governing bodies around the world, and many of them have you know, stakeholders, regional associations, and so forth. You know, there's this narrative in Australia that, you know, there are 10 or 9 member federations and 10 clubs, and that's too many, right? In terms of stakeholders. I mean, Germany has 263. They seem to manage okay. So I don't really buy that. I guess for me, the focus is how we can actually coordinate all of these bodies to work on delivering that one focus that you speak of. I know that the discussion is happening, Simon. It's happening amongst the MFs. It's happening with the FFA. It's happening, no doubt, at the FFA. and it's something we need to solve, and everyone wants to solve that, right? Everyone understands that that's important. But as I mentioned earlier, I think a few people are jumping the gun a little bit. I think a few people are falling into the trap of what we've done for the last 25, 30 years and trying to design models without yet understanding exactly what the problem is we're trying to solve and where we want to go to, right? We've changed the model 3-4 times, you know, since 1996. You know, and I mean, personally, I'm hoping we avoid that, and that's the message from Football New South Wales whenever we're in that kind of discussion with the other stakeholders, is first, let's understand our focus, and it's simple organizational design principles, Simon. You know, it's this understanding that function follows form. So function being what we deliver follows form being the structure. Form follows focus, right? We need to understand what we're trying to achieve so that we actually build the structure that helps us get there. Historically, we've done it the other way around, a bit of a knee jerk. The media have something to say. There's a lot of rhetoric. You know, people are accusing stakeholders of trying to hold on to some power that, you know, I'm not aware of, if there is any, and it's probably, it destabilizes, it creates distrust, when actually I think we're all mature enough to have the awkward conversations, the difficult conversations.
Well, look, this is a difficult conversation, and I don't mean it to sound personal, Anta, but you said we've had...
Simon, it's not a difficult conversation for me.
Okay.
So ask anything you want.
Okay, so you say, yes, we've changed the model on lots of different occasions over the last 30, 40 years. The one thing we haven't changed is the member federations. That they've been a constant throughout. My follow-up question, and again, please don't take this personally, but you know, do we need 9 different member federations with 9 different boards, with 9 different CEOs, with 9 different views probably on the way the game is, you know, should be? Or is it better to have, you know, regional offices of the central federation so everything can be more aligned and more easily coordinated? Is that potentially one of the answers? Because quite honestly, Anto, I think, you know, we're running out of time, certainly the professional game. We all know what's going on at the moment. Things need to change, and they need to change pretty quickly. And the fact that we're still going through consultation processes and trying to find out, you know, what the problem is in 2020, it baffles me, because I think we should know by now, and we've got to find the answer pretty damn quick, because we're almost out of time, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, no, thanks for that. So,
sorry, Anta.
No. I'll let you think about this. The most stable organisations in Australian football over the last 30 or 40 years have been the state feds. The state feds, and remember this, I need to preface, I don't come from a state fed background, right? I come from a national governing body background where I spent the, you know, and still the majority of my 25 years working in football. And I remember things that have stuck with me in terms of how political the member federations used to be, right? A long time ago. Things have changed, obviously, since then. But the state feds in the last at least 10 years have been relied on by the FFA to help fund deficits of the governing body and the A-League. That's a fact, okay? And we're still doing it to a large extent. We're relied on to help solve the problem of the Congress review, which we did. The state member federations voluntarily relinquished from 90% vote to 55% of the vote to help or to encourage or to welcome, invite, whatever you want, more stakeholders. Simon, the issue is not the stakeholders' focus. I agree with you that there is a lot of inefficiency, duplication, right? There definitely is. There are reasons for that. In many cases, I think it's evolved organically, whether there's been a lack of guidance or assistance or support or capability building programs from the national governing body, right? I think if we're going to have this awkward conversation, I'll be the first one to say these are all the things we don't do well at state federation level. But at what point will the national governing body take some accountability for that over the last 20 years, or the A-League clubs as well? You know, this is not a criticism, and you can speak with any of the clubs that they know what I'm like in terms of, you know, having this kind of conversation. So, you know, to get back to your question, I think definitely that has to be part of what we're working towards, is really seeing what it is, how we can use the member federations properly so that it actually gives horsepower to the whole ecosystem, rather than dismantling, you know, an ecosystem that is strong, that is embedded, that has long-standing relationships, that is relied upon by a hell of a lot of clubs and associations. You know, I've got my own views on whether there needs to be the boards and CEOs and all the rest of it. But as institutions, I think it's very important for the delivery, Simon. And
you will always, look, I fully agree, you'll always need local implementation. I'm not saying, you know, drag everything to Sydney and leave it there. I just think that we're at a point in time, sorry, James, I won't go on too long. I know that there are others, but I think we're at a point in time where, you know, we have to find the solutions. I know we've said this a lot over the years, but, you know, the game's in trouble. We're in big trouble.
Simon, I'll tell you what I shared with Paul Lederer recently. You know, I see us as an orchestra with no conductor. There's many of us who, and whether it's individuals at the micro level, or more importantly, at the macro level, the institutional level, that have been doing things for generations, right? But we're not coordinated. And I think until we start becoming a bit more coordinated, you know, we'll have a better understanding of where the inefficiencies are, right? Where the duplications are. You know, I fear a knee-jerk, you know, reaction to the rhetoric and the narrative without first going through the process of, you know, again, having this difficult conversation, this, you know, in a mature way, in a critical way, in a safe space where everyone can put their hand up and say, you know what, we're not doing this great. We actually could do with some assistance, but we need it being led by the national governing body. I mean, of course, it'd be ridiculous to argue anything else. Just my personal opinion.
So at the moment, there is no leadership coming from the FFA, from the board, or the CEO's only been in situ for a little while, and obviously he's got other priorities, I imagine, at the moment. But so that's the issue, is it? There's no leadership.
Well, yeah, we'll push it. But Simon, look, even historically, you know, I think we got into a really bad habit of using the MFs more for political reasons rather than for what they could invest and contribute to the game, right? The total environment, and that was one of the reasons I can share with you that, you know, and New South Wales was the one that actually probably pushed it first, was to relinquish, you know, the member fed power from 90% to 55%, right? So that actually, you know, it wouldn't be a case of a national governing body board just going to the 6 member federations that they, contribute significantly to get decisions made, and then have no accountability, right? I mean, we that was deliberate, right? And that was only 18 months ago that we instituted these things. So we're still in the process of evolution and going through some growth. This COVID-19, I mean, this has hit us all for 6, right? Yeah, it's and the benefit of it is it's brought these conversations to the surface.
And sorry, can I ask you what, James? I'm sorry. Can I ask one more question? Then I promise I will shut up.
Fire away, Simon. On you go, mate. That's what it's all about.
So, can I ask, Anta, were you aware that, for example, at Football Queensland, we're about to do that consultation process? Are you working with them? Are you coordinating the results that they've got with your own research and Football Victoria? If the FFA aren't doing it or not leading the coordination, are you doing it amongst yourselves, or is it all the different states operating in silos?
Look, I wasn't aware that they were going to release it.
You see, that's the problem, isn't it? If nobody's speaking to each other, then you're all doing your own thing.
So I'm not sure if they had shared that with the FFA, okay? And if they had, then I would have probably liked for us to maybe have some understanding of it. I agree with you, Simon. There's a lot of things we can do better. We're nowhere near what we should be doing, right? Nowhere near.
I think that's, to be honest, your final answer then, and I'm not going to go at you answer because this is not about individuals, but I think that pretty much sums up the issue, is that one state is going off doing its own thing. The next one does what it thinks is right, probably with the best of intentions. There is no overall focus, and therefore we present as a hodgepodge mishmash of
Simon, so let me share something with you.
Yeah.
About 12, 15 months ago, the member feds, because we each have a different constitution, right? Just to add yet another flavour to your salad, we asked the FFA to provide guidelines and principles that we could then implement, hopefully, into our own constitutions. So at least at that level, at the very highest governing document level, that document which really frames what we can do, what we can't do, etc., is consistent and aligned. There's been obviously nothing, and I understand, and I don't want to be critical, like you said, of individuals, and they've had to deal with separation of league and so forth, but we've all had to do that as well. And I think, I think they need to shift gears a little bit on a few things, if I can use, that example. And I've shared that with them.
Well, there you go. We always knew this was going to be talking football. Thanks, Simon.
My resignation tomorrow.
Not at all.
I wasn't saying that, Anton. I think we're all frustrated.
That'd be a good thing, Simon. No,
I think we're all frustrated, mate, and I think everybody wants this game to move forward, and we're searching for answers. And as I said, I think certainly at the professional level, we appear to be a game that's running out of time. We've got to find the solutions, and obviously, you're one of the people that's in a position of leadership within the game, so that's why I question.
Simon, the discussion is happening. I know James is having it. It's absolutely his priority, as recently as my last conversation with him.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Anta, for your response. Changing tact a little bit, from correct chairman of Adelaide United, I think, Mel
Yep.
Patsfield. Mel, on you go, my friend.
I was just going to ask a very simple question, but Simon's actually opened up a Pandora's box there. But I will ask that question though. I'm part of a football forum here in SA. It's called footballnews.com.au. There's probably about a dozen guys that ask me that know that I'm participating here. It's a very simple question, Anta. Transfers this season, or like transfers right now for the NPL and the state leagues, what's the situation? Are players allowed to transfer? Is there a window? What's the story? Because obviously with COVID, everything's been basically sort of pushed back by a month or two or three, depending on, I guess, in which state you are. SA, I think, are due to start in about 3 to 4 weeks' time, apparently without crowds, and a lot of clubs have come out and said, well, if we won't have crowds, we're not going to start playing. That's a whole story, a different story altogether. But with everything that's going on, nobody really knows what's happening. What is the story, Anta? What's the story in New South Wales, and is it a national approach, or is it, again, state by state?
Mel, when you find out, can you tell me?
Oh, you're kidding me.
No,
I'm going to be embarrassed going back if I don't have an answer tonight.
No,
I said,
look,
here's a guy who should know.
I don't know what the situation is in SA, obviously. I know for us, it's complex. We have club participation agreements with our clubs, our NPL clubs. They've got contracts with their players. Will the NPL season recommence this year or not? Will it recommence a little later in the year? Other player contracts still active when that happens. We're actually in the process of getting some advice legally as well on a few things, because we want to avoid kind of unintended consequences of making a decision that might have an impact on our stakeholders. But I don't think there are any transfers. I'm not aware of any.
Don't you think there should be? I mean, guys have obviously lost their jobs and maybe are picking up work, for example, on a weekend.
Yeah.
Which is then going to prevent them from playing. And if you're a
player
player,
to where, Mel?
From one club to another, within the NPL or within the state.
Is playing.
Sorry? All the clubs in SA are now back training.
Okay.
They have been now for about 10 days. And they're being told that in about 3 weeks, the season will kick off. They haven't given an exact date, but they've said sometime in June.
Well,
so wouldn't it be reasonable to have a transfer period now for clubs that might be losing players that might have to basically start working somewhere, or some of the players might not be prepared to pay for no salary or for nothing. So the clubs then also have the opportunity to replenish their stocks.
Yeah.
But at the moment, nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous to announce a kickoff day, even though they haven't pinpointed an exact day. But that's it. Nobody else knows what's going on.
Yeah, it's difficult, and obviously the situation is a little different in SA than it is in New South Wales. And, without having considered, the challenges and impacts on each of the stakeholders, obviously the players, the clubs and coaches, it's a difficult one to answer.
Can I just say something, by the way? You mentioned before that the federations have generated the money. It's actually not.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Yes,
no, I said we've covered the losses of the national governing body and the A-League.
Yeah, okay.
And we have.
No, you haven't. It's actually the players and the kids and the parents that are contributing the money. It's not the federations.
Okay, all right. You got me on the technicality, Mel. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Well,
yeah, the grassroots has supported the professional game. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. But
I stand
grassroots, there's no guidance though at the moment for the grassroots, and they want to know what's going on.
What guidance? You mean return to play or?
return to play, but also transfers, salaries. And like I said, apparently we're 3 weeks away from kickoff here in SA and nobody knows what the hell's going on. And obviously it doesn't seem like there's a uniform policy, but there's also...
There's not so here's the thing, Mel. There's actually, at a political level, we suffer from the same challenges of a federated model that we're facing and we're confronted with in football. So the SA government is obviously are doing things very differently in terms of, the permission they're giving to recommence football, etc. It's different here in New South Wales. So it's difficult to have a unified position at that level. I can tell you, I mean, I'm speaking with the chair of SA Football, Sam Ciccarello, every other day. So, yeah.
That doesn't give me much hope. Sorry.
It should. He's a good man.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Anta. And I'm sure that's a debate that could go on for some time, but in the interest of time, let's get some other people on the call. Robbo, I know you've got a question for Anta, so fire away, mate, please.
Anta, I know you very well, mate.
That's what makes me nervous.
No, but I also know James Johnson very well. So what I will say is when you took over as the chairman at Football New South Wales, and when I had talks with James about James going in as CEO at Soccer Australia, Football Federation Australia, I said to both of you that you are very brave. And the reason I said that is because when I left Australia in 1997 to go play in Europe, come back, I retired in 2007, and straight away, no financially driven agenda, I started up my own football academy. And the reason, and you know me well, and you know the whole situation behind the football academy, there was a reason for that. Because I had no hope whatsoever in Football New South Wales, to a lesser extent, Football Federation Australia. And I was probably in a situation where I was never going to let my child go through any program of Football New South Wales. That's coming from someone who had been out of the country for 10 years, come back to the country, and are still seeing the same problems. It was almost a corrupt mafia type Football New South Wales that I begged to never be involved with personally, or to let a family member be involved. Therefore, when you took over, you're a very brave man, as I said. But one thing I will say is you and James are two of the best people that I can think of that have potential to change the game. Unfortunately, or fortunately for you, you may get the opportunity to put the right people in place around you. Now, you can't do it on your own. James can't do it on his own. The rest of the federations I can't talk for, but you're the biggest federation. James is the biggest entity of football in Australia. Between the two of you, Anta, two of the smartest guys I know, there has to be a way that you two will put something in place along with the other federations to make the game better. Not the former Socceroos. That's not going to make it better. That's only going to add fuel to a fire that's already burning. One thing I want to say about the football academies in Australia, I'm a big believer in them. And I'm a big believer in them because I was one. The academies in Australia at the moment, the ones that come from overseas, I want to know exactly, and it's not, you don't have to tell me exactly how it works. How does a football academy from Barcelona, Borussia Dortmund, AC Milan, how do they come into our country, set up an international football academy, which therefore might be soft scouting to therefore take players abroad? How does that wash with Football New South Wales and potentially the other federations? Do they fly under the radar? Are they questioned? Is there any mandatory form that they must, require or acquire to before they even get a chance to start trading in our country, let's say?
Yeah, Rob, obviously I'm aware of what you were able to do and the great setup you had, and familiar with some of the other academies. 2 years ago, the board of Football New South Wales and with our management were able to do a review of all of the private academies in Sydney, in New South Wales. Okay, and the purpose of doing that review was to understand their operating models, to understand what they do well and better than what those clubs and academies that are part of our family, the official family of Football New South Wales, could maybe learn from, because some of them do things well, and vice versa, some of the things potentially that we could learn from all of these kind of academies, whether they're affiliated or unaffiliated. We developed a report and we published it. I mean, it's online. You can see it. The intention was that Football New South Wales would create some kind of a recognition or an accreditation. We do accreditation great, right, in football in this country. Everything's accredited. So we thought we'd leverage off that capability and accredit these academies so that we would have them as part of the system somehow, right? Because whether they are or they're not, they're operating. We can't stop that. But at least to have some kind of regulation over them. And if they were private academies, potentially, they'd have to pay a license fee that we could then reinvest into our own affiliated bodies, just to build on the ecosystem. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, it wasn't supported by the broader constituent group in New South Wales, and there were some good reasons as well that they raised for that. I'd like to think that is incubated in terms of something we'd like to do as an organisation in the future, rather than totally, disposed of or rejected.
One of the main reasons, Anta, for the academies set up and the way they are is because the lack of belief in curriculum. Now, Gaz touched on that earlier about curriculum. The curriculum should be in place for grassroots and grassroots only. Outside of that, it should be up to each individual football club at an elite level to have their own philosophy and their own beliefs in the way football should be played. Now, we were brainwashed at Football Federation Australia by a group coming from abroad to say that they will change the face of football in Australia and have us playing better football. My belief is each individual club will have their own way in which they would like to play football. Therefore, no club in Football New South Wales, no club in Victoria, Queensland should be told how to play football. That should be up to them. Now, I know the curriculum's in place so that when players get to national team level, they have some understanding of the way football should be played. My belief is if and when you get to national team football level, that's up to the coach, that's up to the federation to make sure that you adapt to the way they want to play football. Now, the way it is at the moment, the curriculum that's been in set for 10 years is not developing players. What is the point in having a technical director with his own thoughts and his own philosophy if he can't implement the way he wants the game to be played during his time at a football club? That's the part I just can't quite get my head around, and I don't think I ever will.
Rob, I think, my views on that. It's the same thing. I echo the same sentiments. In fact, I think it was an argument that one of our directors at Football New South Wales made at the time, Louis Apostolowski, when the FFA and their technical team came to visit us. And, it was this insistence on playing the same style and embedding the same kind of thinking in the way a team plays. And the very simple question was that our director, Louis, posed was, should a team play differently, right, in the 87th minute, for example, of a game, if they're winning 1-0 or if they're losing 1-0? Right? I mean, and it was a simple question that, you know, I was hoping would have a little bit more impact, but, you know, it's we, like you said, it almost became this kind of ethos of creating a production line. The focus was on the management of a production line rather than the management of a system that produces individual players.
Yeah, it's failed miserably, mate. It's almost like asking Man United and Liverpool to play the same brand of football. Curriculum needs to be in place for grassroots only. When you get to the elite level, the responsibility of the club is to develop you as a footballer. And the reason back in 2008 when I started everything is I could see it coming a mile away, mate. This whole scenario that everybody is in now, I could see it coming a mile away. So therefore, when my child was 12, we decided to leave the country. I mean, how sad that you would even consider leaving, you know, Australia at a child's younger age to get proper development in football, and that saddens me because I was born and raised in Australia, mate.
Robbo, it goes even beyond that. You know, when you were playing, obviously, you know, and coming through the system, the youth league that we had set up at the time, you know, with the northern and southern conferences. I mean, you guys would play probably about 30 games a season in a year, plus finals and so forth. Yeah, I mean, that whole system has been dispensed with, you know, and yeah, I think, you know, my board echoes the same feelings that you've expressed.
Yeah, I know. I mean, look, I know Carly well, and probably many of your other board members, mate. But you know, I just wanted to let people know what my thoughts surrounding Football New South Wales is, because obviously you're the leader there, mate. But as I said before, they couldn't have a better person in there. But unfortunately, you're one, and it would be great to have many Antas and many James involved, and hopefully you will, mate, surround yourself with those people that can make the change and for the right reasons, and no political stands, no hidden agendas, mate.
Thanks, Robbo. That's kind of you.
Just before, thanks, Mark. Just before I pass on to Gary Cole, who's got a statement that he wants to make or a question he wants to ask, just briefly touching on Robbo's question. I know, Anta, that there's a lot of foreign clubs from, you know, whether it's the UK or whether it's from Europe, that are keen to come over and try and put in 3-day camps or 4-day camps on trying to identify players. What do you, or what's Football New South Wales's position on those? Because I know that there's a lot of cowboys out there, and let's make no bones about it, there are a lot of bullshit organisations out there that come along, and it's money grabbing organisations. That's all it is. But you do get the odd professional club that are keen to try and bring in what it is they're trying to do, identify players. I know that there's a talk about, you know, taking the players abroad and taking them outside the Australian game, and that's fine. But what is the stance of Football New South Wales? And I can't, you know, we can't ask anything about Football Victoria or anything else, but what's the stance in Football New South Wales about foreign clubs coming in and setting up trial periods or academies or anything like that?
We don't have an official stance, James. Well, we can't regulate that, right?
Yeah.
If they come in, they come in. You know, for us, you know, part of what we do as well is we act as regulators. Mm-hmm. And if foreign entities are capable of investing, literally investing in football in Australia, then we want to be able to capture that in the football economy, so that ultimately it gets directed towards the areas that need that kind of investment. At this point, we can't do anything. Like Robbo said, they can set up academies, they can set up training camps and so forth.
Yep.
And there's really not much we can do. On the matter of players heading overseas, I'd never begrudge a player heading overseas. If anything, given the current environment, it's probably better for them. That's my own personal view.
Yeah. I know that there's been a lot of questions here tonight, and I know I've got to say, Anta, the way that you've handled these has been nothing short of phenomenal. So thank you for that. Gary, I'm going to hand over to yourself. I know you've got a comment about the one management model.
Yeah, just really going back to Simon's discussion, the Australian government's National Sport Plan talks about that one management model, which, trying to think of the term, embraces the federated structure, but requires a whole bunch of efficiency, a shared strategy, growth, customer experience, values. So there's no doubt that by 2030, if our sport wants money from the federal government and probably the state governments, we're going to have to be much better at doing this from probably a shared services model. But how hard would it be, Anta, or what needs to happen to get a shared strategy approach? Is it as simple as Football Federation Australia, one needs to have one? And then how does it get the member feds to buy into that? Is it really, really difficult, or is it just that it hasn't been done?
Unbelievable question, Gaz. Maybe you should facilitate the session.
I'd be more than happy to, believe me.
Gary, it's asking that, it's writing that very thing on a whiteboard with the right people in the room and talking about it. I mean, how hard is it? Part of what I do in my other life is, developing strategies for football organisations, basketball, cricket, whatever it is, internationally with ICC and FIBA and FIFA and AFC, right? Believe me, the goals are not that different. The key focus areas are not that different, right? The ball shape is a little different. So it's not a difficult conversation. We don't have one. We do not have a national plan, right? Football New South Wales commenced or initiated the process of developing a strategy for Football New South Wales a few years ago. Our stakeholders, our associations in particular, rightly so, they said you should defer or just pause that until the FFA provides theirs, right? Their updated one. Right? So again, I know for a fact with James there, he'll attack these things. That's his personality, so that's a great thing. But it's starting the conversation, right? And people say that it's a difficult one. I know Simon and I joked about it. It's not difficult. It's necessary. It's not difficult at all.
Compulsory, or it should be compulsory.
Yeah. So you talk about the one management model. It's very interesting, right? It's a model that Sports Australia has kind of encourages. So basketball does one management model. Basketball New South Wales has a board of directors. They have, per number of participants, incredibly more staff than what we have. If you're an 8-year-old kid, right, and want to play football in Bankstown, for example, you'll pay $11 to Football New South Wales, plus insurance, a few dollars, $14 for the FFA, it might be about $30 to the association, right? And then whatever it is to the club, okay? So at a grassroots club, could be anywhere from $150 to $200. If you're the same 8-year-old kid in Bankstown and want to play basketball, you'll pay, I've got it written down, $66 to the state, not 11, 22 to the association, and then whatever it is to the club. Our program is longer. And I mean, I love basketball, so I'm not having an issue. But we do not defend ourselves when the commentary begins about, you know, the cost of football. But I only wanted to mention that because that's under the one management model, right? Fortunately, we don't get much money from the government, to be honest. Nowhere near what the other sports get, right? And I don't know whether they invest a lot in lobbying or the relationships they have with government are stronger than ours, and something we need to, you know, we need to shift the dial on that totally. It's got to go from here to here kind of thing. So, but I'm not, as someone who's, and at the risk of sounding, you know, not entirely modest, you know, I think I've been exposed to, you know, enough governance models and changes and reviews and forms and organisational structure and strategic plans internationally that would make me question the Sport Australia One management model as it is now. I think it's a little too prescriptive, and it needs to, you know, it could be a little different. Whilst the philosophy of alignment and coordination, absolutely we wouldn't disagree with.
Yeah, bit like the curriculum. The philosophy's a good idea, and for us as a sport, it would be like everyone's greatest prayer to have a strategy that would be aligned for the first time ever. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Conscious of time, we've went 90 minutes, so we're doing really well. Anta, we've got a final question from the audience, and then I'm just going to fire a couple of 60-second questions to you. So, Joe Fernandez, you're on.
Thank you. Anta, this is not specifically for you because obviously we work together and we've known each other for generations. This is really for the floor. I have a question, and this is not directed at you, Simon Hill, but there's a lot of talk in the media about a football person. I'm really interested to know, what is the definition of a football person? And the reason I ask is I've worked in football not as long as Anta, but almost. I've been involved for 23 years. I didn't play at a high level. I played at a club level. I've been the Matildas team manager. I've worked at FFA for 17 years. I've been now at Football New South Wales for a few years. Before that, I was at ACT Women's Soccer many eons ago. Do I qualify as a football person? And I'm not asking you to answer that, but I'm just saying, what is the definition of a football person? Because I see this a lot in all the commentary that we need a lot more football people. And I'll tell you, my response is, I don't think a football person has to wear a tracksuit or has to be a former player, but I'd be interested to hear from the rest of the floor as to your opinion on a football person.
Shall I respond on behalf of the media?
This wasn't directed at you, Simon. I don't think I've seen a correspondence from you about a football person, but I have seen from others, of course.
Look, my take on it is, and I think, to be honest, this probably goes back to, and I'm being careful not to throw stones directly at David Gallop, but I think sometimes when David was CEO, I think I'm choosing my words carefully here. I'll give you one example. I think the response to the Rebecca Wilson article in 2015 with regards to the fans, I think that showed that David probably had a fundamental misunderstanding of how football fans think. That would be my definition, because to me, the response to that was the easiest thing in the world. It was a full toss that he just had to bat over the boundary and defend his own fans and say, our fans are the best in the country. They provide a brilliant atmosphere. Yes, we've got a couple of idiots. We'll sort that out. But it was a free kick. and it turned into the biggest own goal. And I think you can date our troubles, certainly at A-League level, back to that moment, because at that moment, and I wrote this, I said it was the biggest act of appeasement since Neville Chamberlain in 1939. You got it horribly, horribly wrong. And I don't think a football person would have done that, because instinctively they would have understood how football fans think about that particular issue. So that's sort of my definition. Others might have different ones.
Does anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Look, Joe, when people say about football people, it's more a case of, up until recently, there's never been anybody sitting on the board at FFA that has played at a good level. So bringing in the female footballers and bringing in Bresh and the likes is godsend. And the reason for it is, when you play at a certain level, whether that be international, whether that be, abroad, whether that be in the A-League, there becomes an element of, I wouldn't say passion, because we're all very passionate about football, but there becomes an element of someone that has been there that would like to see the game be where they have been before. Now, that's what is that? That's a feeling that people have, in a sense, of football people. Now, they may not be the most intelligent people. They may not be strategically good at boardroom level, but what they do have is a passion, none other than what your passion would be. But what they do have is just a sense of what it takes to get to a level. Therefore, that's why people say about football people trying to make decisions in Australia. So it's to try and take the game in Australia to the level of where these football people have been before. And unless you've been there, you will never know what it takes to get there.
Okay.
But the synergy should marry up, Joe, is what I'm saying, in terms of passionate people and intelligent people that have played at part-time level. But what people are saying is there needed to be more people involved at FFA that have played at the top level across the world.
Rob, I think it's perspective. I think we needed that perspective as well. Yeah, and I know Simon's made a comment that Jack Riley has been on the board, and Moya Dodd, etc. And to have the kind of resilience that we need as a sport is exactly that. To have a variety of perspective, and like Robbo said, for especially players who have achieved what they've achieved and moved right through the system, from the grassroots to all the way to playing overseas and at the highest level. It just adds yet another capability in the governance and management of the game. But I think I understand as well what Joe is saying. That there is this. I think it's coming from one corner only, Joe. To be honest, and I'm not going to get too deep into that.
I agree, and I agree with you, Robbo, that having former players involved is absolutely crucial. There is no doubt about that. I feel it just has to be balanced by people who have worked off the field. So, for example, when I was Matilda's manager, people used to ask me, what did you do? And I'm like, well, Tom did everything on the field and I did everything off the field. And so I've worked at the highest level. It hasn't been running around on the field, but it's been off the field. So I kind of feel that if people could just take on the definition of a football person as, someone like Anta, who's been involved for generations as well, who understand. Yeah, no, you've been all around longer than me, Anta, maybe 2 years.
It's an emotional comment. That's all it is. It's a real emotional comment from people to suggest that if football people were involved, that have then the game naturally should. And I totally disagree with that. I think, as you're saying there needs to be the correct blend But as far as Jack Riley and Moya Dodd, I think what people are saying is there needed to be more influence of people that had played at the top level. So that's no disrespect to those two.
Dodge.
Yeah, look, just to sort of wrap a few of those things up, you know, Simon touched on it, and the previous FFA, you know, we don't really want to go there, but I know that over 90% of the executive and the senior executive did not have a football background. And I would include people like Joe and Anta as football people, whether they were fans, whether they were managers, whether they were committee members at a club, at a grassroots club, at an NPL club. I just don't think you have to have played the game to be a football person. But I know we've been seriously lacking quality and quantity of those in senior executive and board positions around the country. And then there is no balance. We can't have all lawyers and accountants running our game. We need a balance of football-orientated people from the whole scope, from grassroots to management to leadership, previous players, rather than just lawyers and accountants, as we have had probably over the last 5 years. And that's where I think the balance possibly went astray, you know, over the last period of time. So, you know, I grasp a lot of those points, but I really think that balance and the scope of our whole football game is essential. Otherwise, we can't really grasp all the issues that Ant has been talking about tonight.
I think that is a succinct statement. And I think it's a very, very good statement as well, Alan. Thank you for that. Guys, this has been fascinating, if I'm being quite honest with you. It's not over yet, but I do have 5 quick questions that I'm going to give to Anta. Just a little bit of fun, Anta, to try and take the sort of... I won't say pressure, but I think we could talk for hours, Joe. You're absolutely spot on. We could talk for hours on this. Right, Anta, so obviously you're in your office and you've got a lot of memorabilia sitting behind you. So let's see what you do with these. Your favourite football team?
Everton.
Your favourite player?
The first player that I really I became kind of obsessed with was Tony Cotty, scoring a hat-trick on debut against Newcastle. I mean, I'm going back a bit now.
You're going back to the 80s, yeah?
Yeah, but yeah.
Best game you've seen?
Best game I've seen.
Yeah.
Wow. There's a few, James. You know, I was lucky enough to be assistant team manager of the Socceroos in 2006 in Germany. That game against Japan, you know, that was euphoria. You know, I'm going to pick one from Australian football, a game that Robbo played in. The year 2000 grand final of the NSL, Perth Glory and Wollongong Wool, right? I'm showing a bit of age. Perth Glory winning 3-0 at half time in front of 45,000 fans, and Wollongong coming back to take the game into extra time and penalties. And I think Robbo scored a goal in the penalties. I'm sure he did.
Just stroked it away, Ant. Nothing.
I mean, you know, the Uruguay game against the Aussies. Yeah.
There's a few.
There are so many, James.
There's a few. The most impressive football personality. Hang on, sorry. The most impressive. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear me. Hello, Anta.
Hello.
Hello. He's on mute.
James.
Anta, can anyone else hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Anta. You can't hear. Okay, hang on, he's off mute. He's putting himself on mute. Anta, are you there?
It's gone black.
You there, James?
I can hear you now, Anta. Yes, can you hear me? Obviously, technical difficulties.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, so why don't you write the question down in the chat?
I will do that. What we'll do is I will just quickly send a message to Anta just to give this. In fact, I'll just ask it on the chat. I'm going to ask the most impressive football personality.
Oh,
And the best piece of advice ever given.
Most impressive football personality. Okay. Most impressive. I mean, again, I'll go back to actually, you know what? I think Raleigh Rasic is pretty impressive as a person, to be honest. I mean, this person is incredible. You know, what he did qualifying that team, all games away from home pretty much in 1973. And the stories he has, he's pretty impressive. So that's what I can think of now. Best advice ever given, when I assumed the role as chair, when I assumed the role as chair, I reached out to one of the people who I work with overseas, someone who I admire and respect a lot, is the General Secretary of the AFC. And I said, how do I handle a situation where the board can't decide on a particular matter? And he said, never exercise the casting vote. He said, if you have to defer a decision and you work through with the people who maybe aren't understanding one side of the story or one side of the issue over another, work with everyone, defer it, work with everyone to come to some kind of solution. And it stuck with me. I've never had to exercise a casting vote. If we have to defer decisions, we'll do that. And he said to me, it's typical that when someone does cast or does exercise a casting vote in a board, you can almost immediately point to that time where the board became split and a faction. So that was something really important, James.
Brilliant. Well, ladies and gents, once again, a great event talking football. We've once again went over the allocated 90 minutes, but to be honest with you, I think we could have spoken for hours. Antar Isaac, thank you so much indeed for joining us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. I don't know if you can hear me, but I will call you shortly just to discuss. Our next event, we're taking a week off. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be talking to Lucy Zelich from SBS The World Game. So that should be interesting. She's spoken to a lot of different people, so we're going to get Lucy's views. And that'll be at a slightly earlier time of 5 o'clock. And I've got special thanks to Simon Hill for organising that for me with Lucy. Once again, thank you very much indeed. This will be up on the website and on LinkedIn over the course of the next 24 to 48 hours. Have a fantastic evening, a lovely weekend, and I will see you again in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks,
goodbye.
James. I'm waiting for your lips to stop moving so I can thank everyone. Thanks for your time. Great chat. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers,
Thank
Anta.
you. Bye. Bye.
cheers.